Everything feels urgent, everything feels overwhelming, and somehow even the smallest inconvenience can feel like an actual crisis that sends us spiraling. Why are we so on edge and ready to melt down at the drop of a hat? Here's the truth: you're allowed to not panic. In fact, you will respond more effectively to whatever is actually going on if you can learn to let go of the urge to react immediately to every single thing that wants your attention. I'm your host, Emily Shutt, a professional certified coach with over a decade of experience helping smart, driven women untangle the drama that they have around money, relationships, and well being. I'm here to help you do the same using science backed coaching tools rooted in cognitive behavioral theory, positive psychology, and peak performance. You'll leave with actionable steps for approaching your own life with clarity and confidence. Let's get into it. I have a couple of advantages as a coach when it comes to observing human behavior. I work with clients across a wide range of industries at different levels in their careers, everyone from corporate leaders to solopreneurs just starting out to startup founders going through their first fundraising round. And because of this, I get to see how people in different areas will respond more urgently to different types of cues. So, if there was a universal standard of what was urgent, then we would see people from all walks of life responding in similar ways to the definitely urgent official thing. But that is not what we see, or not what I see as a coach. This is actually good news because it tells us that the vast majority of all of these urgent events are actually subjective. So, we have a choice in how we want to engage with them, if at all. Your brain is what decides what is urgent or not by having a thought about it. And the thought is an optional thing that you decide to have. That sounds a little reductive, but here's what I mean. For some, leaving a text or email unanswered does not even register as something to think about. For others, they will come up with a whole story about how it's rude not to respond right away and they don't want someone to be upset with them. So they'll go out of their way to respond no matter what, even when it's potentially unsafe to do so. The most obvious example is texting and driving, which, by the way, please do not do that. Beyond text and social media messages with friends, we can all think of someone at work who just straight up does not respond to the team chat or never answers an email, like whatever it is. What is urgent is subjective. So there's absolutely a widespread cultural conditioning of urgency across the globe in many places, certainly, and especially in the United States. We are grappling with work or school deadlines, hustle culture, instant notifications, and the 24/7 news cycle, feeling like you're supposed to respond to everything and have an opinion on everything. I am here to tell you, generally speaking, it is not illegal not to engage. You're allowed to not panic. You're allowed to not police the comments. You're allowed to not try to repost everything and then stress out that it's not getting enough hearts. You're allowed to silence the group chat and respond later and just enjoy date night with your partner or your kid's soccer game or whatever it is. Because people are noticing when you're hooked to your phone in a panic or state of distraction, and your body is also definitely noticing and does not like being in a constant state of anxiety or panic. So, I have a very specific example that I think all of us can relate to. Because my birthday is around election time, in 2020, we went to a completely off grid cabin where we could still quarantine, but be out of our usual environment because we were ready to like gnaw our own limbs off. I didn't realize until we got there that we were literally off the grid with no cell phone service, no internet whatsoever. And it was very freaky and uncomfortable to not be able to refresh election updates throughout the day while we were there. But this is an example of where something far beyond our control, outside of voting, is unfolding, whether we are bearing witness to it in real time or not. So the news will have happened regardless of whether you're on top of it every step of the way. But we can make ourselves really anxious if we indulge this idea that we're supposed to be constantly on top of everything that's happening everywhere. There's just no way. Years ago, when I was still in my past life as a financial consultant, I was running a pretty high visibility international project at a relatively young age. And part of the program included recruiting and onboarding like over 100 new hires for an office for the company that we were standing up. So this generally is supposed to be the client's job, but suddenly on day 2 of our open house and hiring event, I guess the client just wanted a break, and they asked me in front of everyone to lead the next round of presentations with absolutely no warning. So if you were to pick a reasonable time to panic, this would be it. It felt like the stakes were very high. And I think this is important because this is where our thoughts play such a huge role in our outcome. If my thought had been, they're trying to mess with me or put me on the spot or embarrass me, I might have fumbled. Instead, my thought that I chose on purpose was, okay, the project manager just needs a break, and I know what points we need to hit, so I'll do my best, even if it's not exactly how she would have done it. And part of me still isn't sure what was actually like quote unquote true from the client's perspective, but it doesn't really matter what was true. What matters is that I didn't panic and I chose a thought intentionally that would help me feel calm and self assured. And if you're wondering, I did just fine. Another false panic example I see all the time, even real time in sessions, is if a client will get a note or communication of some kind from their boss while we're talking. Like I can even hear the pings in the background sometimes. So a lot of times you'll see them physically seize up, they stop breathing, and then frantically try to respond. And it's more awkward if they try to do this while pretending that they're not distracted because it's very obvious. Not that it bothers me. My clients are welcome to use our time however best serves them, but it might bother your spouse or your kids or your friends or your mom or anyone that you're probably checking out on because of the false sense of urgency of the boss ping. When a lot of times the ping is like, where are we on XYZ? And then a minute later, they'll realize that you actually already sent them a full status update an hour ago and they just didn't check their inbox until they didn't get an immediate ping response. A lot of times the urgent things resolve themselves if we just leave them be for a little bit. You do not have to take care of everything for everyone all the time, be on call for lazy questions or anything else. Not only do you not have to, you cannot keep that up for your whole life. No one can. And it's enabling bad behavior, frankly, when we accommodate a thing with a sense of urgency when it is not urgent. There are a few things it's helpful to think about here. So, first, it's going to be helpful to know what it feels like when you're starting to spiral or panic so that you can notice it and redirect yourself when it happens. I generally don't panic about things that aren't an immediate threat, but sometimes something does catch me and I'll have a very strong surge of adrenaline, like tensing of muscles, and my mind will go kind of blank as I prepare to just take action. This is evolutionally useful. We've talked about this before. We want to be able to react right away when we're in actual danger, but as I've shared, our brains are not evolved to appropriately parse out real threats from imagined ones in our current landscape. And there are people who profit from you not being able to tell the difference and still responding as if everything is a threat. So think about what is your goal in immediately responding to things, reposting, commenting, whatever. Like, what are you hoping will happen? Or what are you hoping other people will think? If you're anxious about leaving your phone in the other room while you're sleeping, why is that? Are you afraid you'll miss a text and then someone will get mad at you? Even if they did get mad, then what would happen? Like, is that how you want to live? How long will you keep that up? If you're afraid to turn off your email, Slack, Teams, text, pings, and dings during time with your loved ones, why is that? Are you hoping to convey that you're a hard worker to your boss? Like, does your work not already signal that? Do you want the way you're perceived to hinge on whether you're immediately responsive and for how long? And at what point in your career do you get to stop? Or on the other hand, are you trying to signal to your friends and family that you're very important and in high demand? Do you not feel appreciated or respected if you don't try to signal how busy you are? And this is a little cheeky, but it is a real example. Like I mentioned earlier, if you try to multitask typing responses to incoming messages on your computer while you're in a coaching session with me, like what is going on for you there? In many cases, people have been conditioned to believe that it will reflect poorly on them and that there will be a negative consequence to responding at a later time, even if it's literally only 20 minutes later. It doesn't happen that often, but it always surprises me when it does because it's not like free to work with me. And when I do recognize someone has split attention, I don't take it personally, like I said, but I do have compassion for the amount of optional stress they must be putting on themselves to make that choice and also waste their money. So it's a great thing to work on with a coach. A quick aside on multitasking while we're here. It's virtually impossible to do effectively because of the way the brain is structured. And I hear a lot of people will claim to be really good at multitasking. It's just not true. So you've got your frontoparietal control network and dorsal attention network, basically picking a goal and parsing data to highlight what's relevant to the goal while disregarding what is irrelevant to the goal. The ventral attention network is more like the distractible of the siblings, taking in things that are both relevant and irrelevant. So when we try to multitask, our brain keeps resolving for relevancy across competing goals, constantly shifting attention rather than processing them simultaneously. And it's not what brains were designed for. So I can think of lots of people, and I have been one of those people, no shame, who proclaim to be great at multitasking, but to the attentive observer, they're just rapidly task switching and usually vastly overinflating how well they're doing it. There is research that the cost of task switching can lead to up to a 40% reduction in productivity, which is a hard pill to swallow. But those moments of trying to reorient between tasks really do add up. One exception here is that research also shows that pairing a physical task that you've done a lot and are very good at already, like walking, can be paired with a mental task, like listening to a podcast like this one, without a loss in productivity. But trying to listen to your friend on the phone while you're scrolling on Instagram and reading the comments or captions is not going to be successful because you are putting competing demands on the same part of your brain. You're not getting the full experience out of either activity. So pay attention to which types of activities you're pairing together and experiment with short bursts of singular focus just to test how productive you are when something has your undivided attention. And I'm not immune to this either. It's not something you just magically stop doing. It takes practice. It took a long time for me to stop compulsively checking my email before bed or to read the news first thing in the morning. It turns out that emails will still be there and the news will still be the news, even if you only check it once a day. For emails, I think part of what was going on for me was that I liked feeling needed. And I equated that with having someone ask me for something in an email. Like that was an indication that I was relevant and that I mattered. And when I say that out loud now, it sounds so weird and foreign to me, which is just more evidence that our thoughts are subjective and changeable. And it's not a belief that I have now. But at the time, I needed to be really clear about the reward I was getting from the behavior if I wanted to make a change. It's natural to want to know new updates about things the instant they happen, but the vast majority of the time, they do not directly affect you and they can wait. Obviously, there are some things that require immediate attention, but you're probably not going to learn about them by refreshing your news app. I think a lot of times we do this because we're afraid of being judged or seeming ill informed or out of touch, as if someone is going to appear out of the blue and grill us on the latest development of something going on overseas. And not only is that a reflection of what we're just judging ourselves for, and maybe a signal that we want to be more meaningfully involved in something we care about, but it's also an impossible goal because the target is constantly moving and the news is constantly changing. That's not even factoring in misinformation and clickbait. So that's when it comes to the news cycle. But what about panic about work notifications? I see examples across all these different platforms all the time with some clients so on edge about getting a ping from their boss that they will get physically ill. Or if you log off on Friday night and to your horror on Sunday afternoon, yes, I know a lot of you do this, you will see that your boss messaged you like mere minutes after you signed off on Friday. And now you're afraid you look like a slacker, even though you already actually worked late on Friday. It's endless, and it's not like we want to be doing this, it's because we're afraid of something. So what are you afraid of? And is that worth reinforcing? Like, do you like the results that you get? Do you want to train your boss, your team, your direct reports that you're always going to be available at all times? Or do you want to communicate that you are there to support them? And here are XYZ easiest ways to get in touch when they do need help, understanding you're not always immediately available. The only people who will be upset about you setting a boundary are the ones who are taking advantage of your lack of them. And this is easier said than done. I totally recognize that. Women are conditioned to see their value as coming from what they can do for others. And a lot of times that means being on call for any and all queries that anyone might ever have, boss or otherwise. When you layer in the perceived rewards of being praised by your boss for how on top of it you are, as well as the pressure of an uncertain economy and reliance on a specific income to support your lifestyle and support your family. This is a lot to try to renegotiate, and it is hard. And changing course can feel like a literal threat to survival because of those factors, but it can be done thoughtfully if you learn the tools and want to make the effort to overcome your own discomfort and have some challenging conversations if necessary. So, this is a generalization because the vast majority of my clients are working in office settings where they're not dealing with actual threats to physical safety. That said, I do have some clients in industries where their immediate availability and responsiveness is one of the clearly defined and documented aspects of their job. So, I'm talking healthcare professionals, facilities management, materials processing, things like that, where there could be a true emergency and their role in particular is expected to handle it in real time. In those cases, like, yeah, you're going to have a different way of navigating this, but even in those scenarios, panic is not going to be an effective strategy. No matter what's going on, you want to take a breath, understand the situation, ask questions if you need more clarification, and then respond calmly and rationally. That doesn't mean you're slow. You're going to be more effective and less likely to make a mistake if you can neutralize the panic response first. If we take a healthcare professional as an example, even in those situations that are literally life or death sometimes, you still cannot be on 24/7. A lot of my clients in medical fields have a hard time unplugging at all because they're so used to the expectation that when they are at work, they are really on and they're used to being counted on for critical decisions. And they like the feeling of being able to contribute in this way. That is not a bad thing. So, especially for high achieving women, this is a really big one. I completely get that. And I get why it would be hard to turn it off for a vacation or even for a weekend when you're not on call. That's where having a clearly communicated plan to your team in advance is crucial. Be very clear about who is in charge in your absence, how decisions are made, what outstanding issues might bubble up during your absence that can be addressed in advance, and how to get in touch if there is a true emergency. And also, what is the definition of a true emergency? Someone's PTO approval request, for example, is not an emergency. When you feel the urge to check your email or Slack messages while you're on vacation, just check in with yourself before you do that and ask if this is an essential part of your role. Because the reality is, we erode the benefits we would get from unplugging if we're secretly spinning about being unplugged. It doesn't work if you're just feeling anxious about what could be waiting for you in your inbox. I've said this before, but I'll say it again. This does not feel good at first. This feels very weird and uncomfortable if you've never done it before, but it gets easier with practice. So that's where I just want to say it's worth digging into what's driving the behavior because sometimes it's a simple fix and just a matter of practice. And sometimes it is a much heavier, much more serious trigger that could require more intensive support than, a podcast or coaching provides. So that's not to say you can't coach yourself or work with a coach simultaneously with a therapist. A lot of my clients do. But being curious and honest about what's going on for you is going to help you make the decisions that are going to best support you. In my own experience, I was recognizing that the constant on edge feeling and checking of messages, etc., was derailing my focus and my actual productive output. But brains are kind of sneaky sometimes, and it will feel productive to reread emails, refresh news sites, compulsively check your phone, as if it's just part of the bucket of non negotiable tasks for survival. But it's not. It's not productive. You haven't produced anything. You're continuing to reinforce your brain's hyper alertness and readiness to react to anything coming in. And at best, you're just going to feel anxious and fatigued until you make yourself sick. And at worst, you will react to something in a way that you end up regretting. Panic does not equal productivity. You are not meant to respond to every single thing or to have an opinion on everything for that matter. Evolutionally, it helped keep us alive to assume that everything could be a threat because in the early days, that was kind of true. Nowadays, of course, there are still real threats, but the vast majority of content we panic and get worked up about is not an actual threat. We might feel upset about it and decide to take meaningful action based on what we think should be done, but that is different from panicking or like being ready to panic at all times. So it's really important to understand that distinction. Give yourself permission to pause and break the cycle. If you're noticing that you're having trouble sleeping or you're always on edge, you're always tired, you wake up tired, it doesn't take much to make you burst into tears. You're probably overloaded with inputs that all feel like emergencies. So, what can you realistically set some boundaries on? Who would it help to share that with if it's going to be a major change? Like, if you want to turn off the horrible bottom right corner of the screen Teams messages notifications or Outlook notifications, well, you can just do that. It's not illegal. If you want to turn off email notifications and just set calendar blocks to check your email a few times a day in bulk, that's also allowed. It's unlikely anyone will even notice. Even if someone does notice, they will quickly adapt in most cases, and it could even end up being a positive thing. Like your direct report might want to take more ownership of something, but never gets the chance because you always respond so quickly to any other department inquiries. And if you take that pause, you allow someone else to shine while giving yourself a break. Trust that if something is truly urgent, they will find you. If you're afraid someone will be annoyed with you for being less responsive, think about how annoying it is for you when Greg from billing doesn't respond for hours or even days and yet still lives his life. He is not bothered that you're annoyed. It's okay if someone is annoyed, let them be annoyed. It is not the end of the world. The alternative is that you're putting so much pressure on yourself trying to be everything for everyone all the time. Do what is most supportive for you, even if it feels uncomfortable at first, because it will, and then let others decide how they want to feel about that. That's okay. That is not your business. So here's what to do. Start with articulating for yourself what it feels like when you panic so that you can register on a conscious level when it's happening. You can do this for any emotion that seems to be ever present for you, whether it's anxiety, edginess, anger, or so on. If you notice it come up, what were you doing or thinking about? Like, do you like the way that you engage with it, or is it something that you'd like to change? And these are not rhetorical questions. I want you to actually answer the questions. Some low hanging fruit is going to be turning off cell phone notifications, which you can do in settings. It's very easy. And reevaluating how essential the notifications are on your different work communication channels. Set time limits for apps or delete them if you feel stressed and anxious when you use them. It's important to be informed about what's going on in the world, of course, but you cannot solve everything that's going wrong. And constantly refreshing the newsfeed is not going to change that. It's just going to spin you up and severely handicap your ability to actually respond effectively to things that you actually can influence. So if we're always doom scrolling, we're not taking meaningful action to make the changes that we want to see. We can't even really define what those are when we're completely in a state of panic about the world. Notice if there are certain people that you feel more pressured to respond to more immediately and how you're handling that right now. What's a small baby step boundary that you could set? Maybe it's just 30 minutes with your phone in another room while you work out or watch a TV show. When I started to practice putting my phone on Do Not Disturb during the workday, I knew my family was very used to me being very responsive at all times. So I just gave them a heads up that that's what I was going to be doing so that I could focus on getting more work done. And they weren't mad about it, of course. You probably don't need to send out a press release if you're going to be less online or less responsive. That's kind of like when people post announcements that they're going to be going off social media for a while. It's like, okay, cool, no offense, but no one notices or cares most of the time. And maybe if it stings to hear that, that's probably where some of the work is for you as well. Like, do you want people to care that you're chiming in at all times? How might you cultivate an inner sense of relevancy that isn't dependent on trying to gauge how much someone would miss your Instagram posts? And I don't mean that to be snarky, but I just want us to be real about this. Like, you get to decide if you want or need to share, if you're making some adjustments, but the main point is to actually just make the adjustments, not worry about how you're going to explain yourself. You do not owe anyone an explanation for opting out of this manufactured panic industry. Of course, this does not mean that you just ghost your boss. That is not what I'm saying. You can respond to things without panicking. I always think it's helpful to take some time to process when something really rocks you, reflect on it individually, decide whether a direct response is truly needed from you specifically, or if you're feeling called to take action in some other meaningful way. If something is just rage bait with no useful action coming out of it, it's a complete waste of your energy. Think of when people share horrifying videos online to shock and enrage people, but then provide no outlet for that emotional activation through volunteering, donating to causes, meaningful advocacy, etc. All of that energy gets stirred up and has nowhere to go, so it just stays in you and it's exhausting. Finally, when we're done renegotiating how we respond to big world events, also take some intentional time to practice normalizing, taking a few hours before responding to messages that aren't actually time sensitive. Like, don't wait until after dinner to chime in on the group chat about where you want to meet up for dinner. But not everything is time sensitive and not everything requires panic. If you want to engage effectively with yourself, your friends, your boss, your family, and the world, you will be much better at that if you learn how to treat panic like an optional response and choose not to indulge it. Urgency thrives on access, and if you never log off, you never get out of the cycle. Like, everything is loud and wants your attention, but in the wise words of Taylor Swift, which I am paraphrasing, your attention is a luxury item and not everyone can afford it. If you needed this reminder today, bookmark it for your future self or send it to that friend who always seems to be freaking out about something. I hope you came away with some insights you can apply in your own life right away. I'll see you next time.